right, great. So, well, Congressman, thank you again for doing this interview with us. So,
Glad to be here.
yeah. So when you were an IOP fellow here back in the spring of 2014, I remember you discussing your opposition to Obama's plan to regulate greenhouse gas emissions through the EPA.
Right.
Now that it's finalized its Clean Power Plan, do you see any redeeming aspects of it?
Maybe as a vice to sort of pry action out of fellow conservatives, perhaps. I mean, in other words, there's a risk that the legal strategy that some believe will save us from the Clean Power Plan, which is the regulatory answer that we aren't real fond of at republican.org, that strategy could fail, and if that legal strategy fails, challenging in the courts, then it makes it necessary to have an alternative. And so in that way, it's useful as a vice or a hammer or a sword of Damocles hanging over conservatives, you know, that it's to come up with something or else this is it. But like I say, many conservatives are basing a lot of hope on the legal strategy, but that legal strategy could fail.
Yeah. Have you reached out to any conservatives who are like involved in the legal effort to overturn it, about kind of here's an alternative that can make your case a little more convincing?
No, I don't. I guess it wouldn't be relevant to their legal strategy. In that the legal strategy is simply that the EPA has exceeded its. I think that's right. I think the only way that they can be successful in court is if they are able to show that the EPA has exceeded its authority. So the availability of an alternative isn't relevant to that judicial determination.
Yeah.
But we think that it is relevant, though, in the court of public opinion.
Right. So you started the Energy and Enterprise Initiative back in 2012, and one of the biggest energy developments since then has been the crash in the oil price. Do you think that will make your group's proposal to tax carbon an easier sell?
Perhaps. You know, because we got used to high oil prices for a while there, and now they're down, and our gasoline prices are down, and so the result is that people are feeling less threatened. Of course, my problem when I was talking about all of this when I was still in Congress was I was doing so in the midst of $4 gasoline, $4 gallon gasoline, and that's people were very, very nervous at the time. They had very much feeling under threat, and so here comes a guy with even more threat, you know, increasing the price of gasoline, 25 cents a gallon if you put on a $25 per ton price in carbon dioxide. And so, I think now it's a little bit better because there's a sense that, gee, we can handle these gasoline prices.
Yeah. Have your former constituents in Greenville, Spartanburg warmed up to the idea?
I don't know. I think among the activists in the Republican Party, no.
Yeah.
Of course, among friends there, you know, there's the ones that I would be seeing nowadays rather than people at town hall meetings. The friends are with us on it, but not so much the activists that really have been womped up into some fear by some people that are spending some very good money on creating that fear, or not creating it, fanning the fear, keeping it going, making sure it's burning hot. And that's one of our huge challenges, of course, is figuring out how to spread some calm rather than this sense of, you know, the bureaucrats are trying to take over the world, that these pointy-head scientists are telling us what to do, you know, the godless scientists and the big government types are taking over. So what we want to show is that no, they're not necessarily godless scientists, and there's a small government answer to this.
Yeah, I got kind of a sense of that fear watching Marco Rubio in one of the recent Republican debates. Do you think, or what do you think it would take for your group to win over him, or say Jeb Bush or John Kasich?
I think not much. It wouldn't take much in terms of reaching any of the three of them because they're smart enough to understand that this is what economists would say to do, and they're smart enough to understand the science.
Mm-hmm.
The question is whether we can show them enough political support that they would feel comfortable leading in that direction. And it is about showing that level of comfort. That's what we've got to do at Republican.org. I mean, you might wish that politicians would all lead because of some courageous conviction, but the reality is politicians generally follow, they don't lead. And so if we can establish a constituency for free enterprise action on climate, then we will have some volunteer leaders among politicians.
Right. Are you hoping, is there any particular development you're hoping for out of the Democrats that might enable you guys to set yourselves up as an opposition to them?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I don't know. So far the 2016 race has gone better than I've feared. It's gone better in that we haven't yet had that disastrous result that happened in the North Carolina Senate GOP debate in 2014, where moderator asked, "Is climate change a fact?" Audience laughs audibly. First candidate says no. Second candidate, she's laughing, says no. Third candidate, no, it's God's will. And the fourth candidate, Tom Tillis, who got elected to the Senate in North Carolina, says no. 14 seconds, and the issue is done in North Carolina.
Right.
So the good news in the presidential race is we haven't had that disaster.
Right.
But what we do have is the risk of continued polarization. I happen to believe that it may sound counterintuitive, but the best shot at early action on climate is a Republican in the White House, a conservative in the White House.
Right.
Because the country could trust such a person to touch climate change. Just like Nixon could go to China, Bill Clinton could sign welfare reform, conservative can do climate change.
Right.
If, say, Hillary Clinton were elected president, then what you'd have is somebody that's maybe perceived as very close to Al Gore and the alarmist on that'd be the perception among some conservatives. It may actually slow down the progress. It's counterintuitive, I think. I mean, but nevertheless, I'm sure the environmental left will line up behind Hillary.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of, the problem is it bakes in polarization for a little longer.
What about on the congressional level? Are there any races for the Senate or the House that you guys are keeping an eye on?
Yeah, there's action in the House. Chris Gibson from New York has introduced a resolution. The Gibson resolution says climate change is real, and he's got now 11 other Republicans on it. And so that's a very encouraging sign. It's similar to the Hoeven amendment in the Senate that got 15 Republican senators to say that climate change is real. And so, there's some movement. Now, in fairness, most of those on the Gibson resolution are from moderate districts. So it's going to take a while longer for it to spread into deeper red districts, which is, of course, what we hope to do. We want to show really deep red Republicans that this is consistent with what they deeply believe.
Right. So the movie that you've come to present, Merchants of Doubt, focuses on how public relations firms have led a lot of Americans to deny issues like climate change and the health risks of smoking. But a lot of people in this country, and many of them liberals, have denied the science on issues like vaccine safety and GMOs. Have the conservatives you've met brought that up as maybe a sign that liberals can't be trusted either on matters of science?
It's a great question. The answer is no. You usually don't bring it up. Conservatives usually don't bring it up, but I've got another to add to the list. It's abortion, right? I mean, abortion, the science clearly shows a baby and a human being. And so it's nobody has a corner on science, you know. I mean, it's like we choose to either accept science or not based on something else that's going on in our hearts, right? And so for people that, you know, as a guy that's a pro-life conservative, I think the science is very clear about when life begins.
Yeah.
And to argue otherwise is an unscientific position.
Right.
To argue against GMOs is a terribly unscientific position. To argue against vaccines, which happens on both the left and the far right, is a very unscientific position. And so, yeah, and what the thing that's interesting is what we have to admit is that people that, a lot of people that dispute the science of climate change are actually highly literate in scientific matters. And I shouldn't say, that's not exactly correct. They're more literate, I shouldn't say highly literate, they're more literate than the average, let me make sure I get the statistic right. But Dan Kahan at Yale found a statistically significant result that those who dispute the science of climate change actually score better on science literacy in the samples that he was doing than the general population that he was testing, which is an interesting fact. And what, you know, you might remember Dan Kahan was one of my guests in the series here at the University of Chicago, at the Institute of Politics. And one of the things that Dan has found is that the more developed your worldview, the more certain you are of what you've come to in your mind after examination of various worldviews, makes you actually very difficult. It makes it very difficult for you to change your mind about something.
Yeah. Because
such a person has more ability to dismiss contrary evidence more quickly because they need to for an economy of mind's sake. I mean, they've invested a lot of time and energy deciding that they are whatever worldview they've developed. And so therefore they quickly dismiss contrary information.
Right.
Which is really a fascinating result. It's not what you'd expect. You'd expect for such a person to be open to new ideas. It's a very rare bird that's actually open to new ideas.
Yeah. So I guess in your work with Republican, are there any moments when you've managed to change someone's mind, say a real conservative individual's mind on the issue of climate change?
Yeah. One of the most exciting was actually on radio. A libertarian talk show, and the tease going into the show was not going well. Actually, I was in the dentist office, if you believe, actually being attended to, and the tease. So I'm getting these texts from my guy that does media with us saying the tease is not going well. You know, it's like they're setting you up for slaughter. Is basically what it was, and so I'm like, oh God! So I race out of the dentist's office, sit in the car, get on the phone, you know, now calling into the radio station from South Carolina to the radio station in Florida.
Yeah.
And so he extended the segment, and by the end of it, he was accepting the idea that these people really are solid conservatives, and what they're talking about makes sense too.
Yeah.
So that was an exciting, it actually had to do specifically with rooftop solar and third-party financing of rooftop solar.
I see.
Because, you know, some states are fighting that, which is so contrary to what we conservatives believe. By golly, that's my castle. My house is my castle. It's my roof. And I will contract with whomever I wish to put a system up there. But there's some monopolistic power companies that are trying to stop that third-party financer from installing that on the roof.
I see.
And so that obviously became quickly apparent to that libertarian talk show host, and he was signed up with us. And that the reason we talk about that a great deal, especially in Florida where a fight is going on right now about that question, is that it opens up the conversation about what else can free enterprise do. And of course it can do a lot in climate change. It can fix the problem.
So one final question. When you won the JFK Profile and Courage Award, you mentioned that one of the moments that led to your changing your mind on climate change was when your son said that he would vote for you, but you had to clean up your act on climate change.
Yeah.
So do you think that other conservative senators and representatives would be open to changing their mind if more of their kids spoke up?
I think so. Kids have a powerful opportunity here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really significant influence that kids have over parents, and I've always felt that, but now I've actually heard some data on it. You know, it's always fun when your hunches are confirmed by data.
Right.
And so Tony Lacerowitz at Yale I was at a conference of his recently, and he pointed out that they have data that shows that the transmission of ideas is actually stronger from child to parent than parent to child. Which makes sense, because a culture that's able to adapt is one that's able to hear from young people, because they have a greater claim on the future than older people. It's just the older people have the title deeds, but you know, the young people own the future. Yeah, it's, I think that there's a real opportunity for especially college students to speak to their parents and really affect them. And it's, you know, it's not a threat though. It's a thing that's, you know, in the case of my son, some people, and oddly in my view, perceived it as a threat, that he wasn't actually, he was really gonna fail to vote for me, refuse to vote for me, if I didn't change the Clinton Act on the environment. But it was not in his economic interest to not vote for me. I mean, he needed to vote for me, and he was going to vote for me no matter what. I think what it was is he was saying, I love you, Dad, and I want you to be what you can be, and you're not there yet, so how about get with it? You can do better than this, you know? And so if it's in that spirit, I think that the children of parents who are at this point not accepting of climate science or believing that there are sound economic answers that don't hurt the economy, actually improve economic performance, and that are deeply consistent with conservative held values, those students can have a huge impact on their parents just by being patient with their parents and by showing them the science and by showing them the economics. And by asking, isn't this what you say you believe, Dad? Isn't this what you say you believe, Mom?
Yeah. A moment ago, your mention of college students made me think of a final question. So here at UChicago, we have a fairly vocal divestment campaign. What's your take on that movement?
I really don't know. In fact, I was interested in what Michael Greenstone was just saying there. It adds some market pressure, which seems to me to make sense. Of course, I also think that, you know, another way to play it would be just get some money together from lots of folks or some wealthy folks and go buy the coal companies, and then say we're saving that coal for the future. The market price is down real low right now. I mean, of the coal companies, you could almost do it. I mean, it wouldn't cost that much money to actually buy the coal companies and then just say, we're not going to exploit this resource at this time. So I'm unclear about, and it'd be interesting to hear what Michael and Steve Sakala might say about that after this panel. I know that in the case of apartheid, when I was at Duke University as an undergrad, I wish that I had been involved in that effort. I wasn't. It was one of those things, you know, you look back and you think, how did I miss that? That clearly put pressure on South Africa and ended apartheid. So it worked there. And so it seems a tool that works. On the other hand, whether it's I don't know though, whether there's another way to engage with those companies. I'm just, I need to think that through a little bit more. We haven't really been involved in the divestment effort at all.
All right, well, Congressman, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Patrick, for the opportunity. Great to be with you.